Thank you, everybody, for rejoining us. Again, I see many familiar faces. That is very nice. Welcome to you all for what is going to be an amazing lecture, I promise. My role is very small today. I'm only here to introduce my dear colleague, and I can call you a friend too, right, Tanya, my dear colleague and friend Tània Verge, who is a full professor of politics and gender at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the University Pompeu Fabra at Barcelona. Her main area of research is gender and politics, with a focus on how political parties and parliaments are shaped by gender dynamics. And she also does research on resistance to the adoption and implementation of equality policies. And she also has done amazing work on the two together. One of, I think, what I believe is one of your great pieces of research is the one where you investigate the impact of gender quota on party internal functioning in Catalan parties. I use this article in my courses on gender and politics. It's a great piece of work. At Pompeu Fabra, she also led the equality unit between 2014 and 21, which is quite a long time. And you also coordinated the minor in gender studies at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. And it was in that period, actually, where we started collaborating quite intensively together, because in 2015, we co-organized the big conference, the European Conference on Politics and Gender in Barcelona at your university. And actually, it is there where it became very big, where we got very close to the 500 participants, which was a major achievement. And we also enlarged it there to include LGBTQI and sexuality studies. And now the really exciting part starts. Between 2021 and 2024, Tània served as Minister of Equality and Feminisms, plural, of the government of Catalonia. And between May 24 and February 26, so very recently, she was also a member of Parliament in the Parliament of Catalonia. So in the moment where Tània was minister, she returned to the European Conference of Politics and Gender, and you just said that you didn't miss many of the lecture of the ECPGs. But in 2024, she gave the most amazing keynote lecture at ECPG, where she actually explained how she had tried to implement and actually implemented many of the solutions that we had been discussing throughout all these ECPGs to establish gender equality in politics, but actually also way beyond that. So this was the most impressive lecture, and really interesting to see what happens if a scholar enters the real world of politics at the highest level. And it turned me really hopeful of what we could achieve. It is from this dual practitioner academic perspective as former Minister of Equality and Feminisms and a feminist institutionalist scholar that she will reflect today in her lecture on the extent to which feminist governance can be designed to endure in the absence of feminist insider activists, or be relaunched swiftly when they are back in the room. She will discuss gendered legacies, countering mechanisms of remembering the old and memory infrastructure to counter forgetting the new, and embedding new feminist logics of appropriateness. Needless to say that these are big ideas for democracy that we desperately need and are particularly relevant in our times of global dismantling, backsliding, and watering down of feminist policies across governments, whether far right or center left, as well as in our universities and other institutional arenas. So Tània, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, all of you, for attending this session. Thank you, Brias, for allowing me to recover from this intense period and at the same time reflecting on all these issues in an academic way. But since we cannot leave the different hats we wear or have worn, this practitioner perspective will always remain with me. So thank you to the two program directors, Sylvia Urzel and Emily Vanot, the working package leaders, but also all the admin office, all the team here at Brias with Anya, Valeria, and Andres. So I would like to start with a very short video, which is the institutional campaign for 8 March 2023.
Saps una cosa?
That the government of Catalonia launched. It's just 1 minute. It's subtitled in English, so you'll be able to follow. And the music, I think it's worldwide famous. Okay?
Saps una cosa? Si creus que homes i dones hem de cobrar el mateix. Si fas teves les tasques de casa. Si aquí hi veus bellesa. Una família.
Okay. Why it's not showing? I have to stop this. See, well, okay. I already did. I thought I did.
Saps una cosa? Si creus que homes i dones hem de cobrar el mateix. Si fas teves les tasques de casa. Si aquí hi veus bellesa. Una família. Aquí una dona valenta. I aquí també. Sí, ets feminista. Perquè no importa qui o com siguis. Si ets conscient que no tothom té les mateixes oportunitats, però crides perquè tothom pugui arribar a tenir-les, feminista. Si per aquí no passes, si culpes l'agressor i no la víctima, molt feminista. Si penses que ella pot ser enginyera o bombera, o que els productes menstruals haurien de ser gratuïts, o per decidir si vols ser mare o com ho has de ser. Feminista al quadrat. Si t'agrada ballar per tu, cuidar-te per tu, vestir-te i maquillar-te per tu, sense que importi qui o com et mira, sí, 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 ets feminista. I si no sabies, no passa res, perquè en els feminismes tot és començar. 8M, Dia Internacional de les Dones. Generalitat de Catalunya.
So the reason why I showed this institutional spot is because I think that even if it's been only 3 years since it was launched, such an ideological spot, it's an institutional statement, clearly. It's quite unthinkable today. Which government do you think would dare to launch this type of spot nowadays? Even where the extreme right is not in government. If it was possible back then, that was 2023, it's because of this current of massive demonstrations of various social movements, the women's movement, yeah, but also the LGBT movement, the anti-racist movement with the global resonance of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that made or helped several governments to be bold enough to further equality policies in significant ways, and some of them even self-identified as feminist. But today, these days seem quite distant. There's backlash from far-right governments advancing anti-gender ideologies. You can see on the right-hand side 2 decrees passed by the White House right after the inauguration in 2025, with this obsession with gender identity and transgender rights, but also attacking massively all diversity and equality inclusion policies. So positive action is gone for the moment in the United States, at least at the federal level. But also you see how some governments are, this is Milei, the president of Argentina, with the recently elected president of Chile, Cast, and this chainsaw symbolizing we are gonna cut all superfluous, not just money, but also policies, and that includes gender equality policies in both cases, including the dismantling of the equality structure. But closer to home, there's also significant rollback. You have the Belgian government, which you identify, and the difference between the 2 coalitions is not only that one picture seems to be 10 years old due to the gender composition, but also there's no equality minister with cabinet level status. So it's been downgraded again. And then you might think, oh, but we have hope in Spain and Catalonia because they have retained the equality ministers. And yes, they have retained them, but they have depoliticized, also deprioritized the policies. So Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez, for example, during the 2023 electoral campaign, when asked by a radio host about the former Minister of Equality, he conceded. I think it was a very big concession to the far right when he said, I do have 40, 50-year-old friends who are very uncomfortable with feminism. So in the middle of brutal attacks by the extreme right to equality policies and the very same minister, that was a statement of the super progressive Spanish prime minister, right? So in both Catalonia and Spain, the portfolios have survived, but they are now led by professional politicians, party loyalists with experience in the local level, but no prior expertise on gender equality policies, nor any of the other equalities that we included when we used the word feminisms. It was intersectional feminism, feminism for the 99%, so anti-racist policies were considered to be feminist policies, LGBT policies too, etc. So it's a very different perspective. So as Karen anticipated, these are key democratic challenges, and these have always been democratic challenges. We now tend to think this is a recurrent discussion we have, and the proselytism we make, like, yeah, backlash is a very big thing today, but this is what feminist policies have always faced. The feminist change, feminist reforms are very difficult to achieve, very difficult, because they face continuous resistance in the implementation period, in the post-adoption period. Mandates might evaporate, they might not be fully implemented, they might be continuously resisted, and this is why transformative feminist change very often needs feminist insider activists holding up the flag for a sustained period and promoting the reforms from the inside. Otherwise, it's very difficult to intervene, not just in particular policies, but actually in how institutions work. But this leads us to the next question, which is, okay, and what happens when the designers, the feminist designers, activists are no longer in the room? Does everything just evaporate, as we know from all the literature? But the question I would like to end up reflecting with all of you is, okay, we know this is the sequence. Can we do something about it? Can we design feminist resilience? Or can we design, including the design phase, the resilience of feminist reforms so that they have a better chance at enduring or at being reactivated when feminist insider activists are back in the room? Not necessarily the same people, but people equipped with the same knowledge, capacity to implement strategic work, and institutional capacity. So I need to go, in these three phases, and I'm going to start with why feminist institutional change is difficult to achieve. So everyone also gets this common language of the approach, which is feminist institutionalism. And it is new institutionalism, right? So it means that when we talk about the rules of the game, we mean all the set of formal and informal rules, so written and non-written rules that define what actors can do, what are expected to do, how they can be sanctioned if they don't behave as being defined appropriately by the institutional setting, right? Rules are always enforced. There might be social sanctions, there might be ostracism, there might be scaffolding, but they're always enforced, and actors know when they break the rules. The informal rules, which might be conventions, ideas, expectations, routines, might well override the formal rules, maybe because of the changes to the formal rules that are too shaking the status quo, or they might exist alongside the formal rules as parallel institutional frameworks. Now, the feminist in institutionalism, or feminist institutionalism, what adds to that is that, we are all bounded by this, our behavior, our interactions are bounded by these rules of the game, but they are not neutral. They've never been. They are gendered, they are race, they are inequality regimes in itself. They reflect power relations in society, because we, unlike the picture, we cannot leave our gender hanging the door, nor our race, gender identity. We are who we are, and gender is not just who we are, how we identify, it's also a process. It's what we do or what we are expected to do. So the invisible byproduct of male domination of political institutions has been the ability to set up the rules of the game and to define how things are done around by reflecting existing power relations. And just to give a very quick example, gender quotas, everyone knows what gender quotas are in politics, in electoral tickets, for example. This is a formal rule because it's a part of a legislative reform. It can be embedded in a constitution, so it's a written document that fixes the percentage of men and women throughout the party list, maybe placement mandates, maybe the sanctionings for non-compliance. It varies across countries. But there are lots of informal rules that might make the formal rule be rather ineffective. It can be that the male ideal type of candidate, it's still predominant, so men are still allocated more safe seats or the higher positions on the list, right? And the result is that the spirit of the law is violated, even if political parties fulfill the letter of the law. Another example that, for example, in this case, Georgina Whalin posits when examining the Chilean case is how consensus-building politics, all the consultation between parties from the center to the left, this consensus-building approaches have gendered effects, because all contentious issues will tend to be sidelined, and gender issues are always sidelined. So it might seem an apparently gender-neutral norm. It is not. So since gender is always contested and resisted, the genderedness, as we could also say, the race of institution constrains the opportunities of individual actors, but also for gender change, particularly when the innovations do not resonate with prevailing values, norms, or where gender reforms target the very same gender norms, practices, routines of that organization or institution. And resistance would be then the opposition to this reform, aiming at maintaining the status quo. It might be more overt, it might be more implicit, it might adopt different forms. And this also explains why the equality entrepreneurs rarely have sufficient power to overthrow the previous rule regime, right? Gradual change is more common. Very often is layered on top of what already exists. And there's a very nice metaphor as well used to explain why this occurs, even in the context which you would think, oh, this is the ideal context, when a new institution is built, the Scottish Parliament, when a new constitution is drafted, South African constitution after apartheid. The International Criminal Court writing, right, which are the crimes against humanity that will be prosecuted universally. So yes, these are all new institutions, new rules of the game, but they are not inserted into a blank slate, because there are legacies that actors might still bring with them from their past experiences in other parliaments, like how the media is also used to adversarial politics, how gender and gender crimes have not mattered as much as others, right? So actors might still tend to fall back into what they know. And in order to gain legitimacy and authority, they remember the old and forget the new. So it requires constant work to make the gender reforms stick. The state feminism literature has also contributed a lot to understand why feminist change is difficult. And it also has to do with the fact that the equality infrastructures, regardless of the type, it can be an equality unit, it can be a ministry, it can be a division within a ministry, it can be an office, they tend to have very poor resources. So it's, the government, no, with the university, whatever is the big house, and then, there's a small unit, whatever, so that the institution can say, we deal with gender equality, but when you open the door, it's, very under-budgeted, with insufficient resources, technocratic isolation tends to prevail, and it doesn't have much political leverage, so it's very difficult to have reforms being pushed and also to influence the overall policy-making process or governance process. But when I searched the data, I wasn't aware. This is a very recent paper that I didn't include here, from 2024-25, that is about the presence of women's ministries or gender equality ministries in national governments. And the data is quite astonishing. So since 1975, over half the countries, national governments, central level governments, have had a women's equality ministry, normally or typically combined with other portfolios, family, social affairs, education, those are the most common ones. It also varies across regions. In Africa, they are quite popular. In Latin America, they have also been. In Europe, not that much. But what's been very rare globally is to have equality ministers that are standalone, fully fledged, cabinet-level ministries, so that they sit at the table, at the key table where decisions are made. And even rarer are those with a vocally feminist position, public position. And this is a very recent phenomena, and it's been a very short phenomena as well. Argentina, for example, the Minister of Women, Diversities, and gender identities, the minister in Chile. Colombia is very recent, and Mexico too. This is why I will not comment on those. But already discussed that, in Spain and Catalonia, they have prevailed political turnovers, but the transformative capacity, both because of the type of actors that have been appointed, but also the discourse they deploy, are very different. In Argentina and Chile, I said, they are already gone or avoided. The Chilean case, the ministry cannot disappear unless the law is modified, but it's been dismantled in practice. So this type of ministries, one would expect to fulfill what more recent conceptions of state feminism, so the public institutions working actively to fight gender inequalities, or inequalities, if we take a more intersectional perspective. So this type of ministries would have more transformative capacity. The recent definitions of transformative state feminism and the feminist insider actors would include, activists or actors that have expertise, that have overlapping memberships with the reference movement, so that they have knowledge of the agenda of these movements, but they also know how to strategize and build alliances. That precisely for that, they will guarantee movement access to the policymaking process, and that the results should be expected to be truly feminist. And in all this intersectional, more structural approach towards inequalities. But the state feminism has tended to focus on the policies and the policy-making process, not so much on governance. So what can these ministries do? They have an unprecedented capacity. So it is not that they are now like the heroic, no, it's not that never before they were on the cabinet table with this institutional capacity. So they should be expected to do more and to be able to do more, right? And this is where I will briefly reflect on my experience before discussing, and can this endure, right? So this is the picture of the government of Catalonia. It's one specific picture in time, because it started as a coalition government and then it wasn't anymore, so it became a single party government. This is a picture from 22. And you see highlighted in green the portfolios led by women, so that it gives you an easy count. 8 women, 7 men, including the prime minister, and no gender segregation of portfolios. Yes, women were leading the culture and education department, which are traditionally considered to be feminine portfolios, but also public works, foreign affairs, economy, right, which tends to be categorized as masculinized portfolios. So no easy classification, basically. No, it didn't. It wasn't an issue. But the fact that there was a Ministry of Equality and Feminisms that was built from scratch, it was the first time that it existed, it clearly disrupted the gendered logic of appropriateness that typically has marginalized equalities policy. So symbolically, it was a state validation of feminist values. Like, these are core democratic issues. And it projected an explicit political commitment by the ministry, also as highlighted by Karen, because it wasn't a minister of equality, but equality and feminisms, right? And with this plural S that explicitly connects to the struggles, to the intersectional, and very basic idea. We were not to distribute cards, like, which is your feminist current, favorite card? I don't care. We are all part of a broader struggle, so let's make these objectives bigger. But descriptively, this is just the picture of the cabinet, but within the portfolio, we were a bunch of activists, and descriptively, it was also we were also breaking some barriers. For example, there had never been a Roma person in a senior position at any level of government. So we had the first Roma person as Director General, as well as the first migrant person leading migration policies, which it sounds reasonable, right? I mean, the persons who know what type of bureaucratic arrangements are institutional racism, indeed, and should be rethink. So someone that has gone through it will be better able to identify those instances. So feminist actors were not just consultants, we're advisors. We became core state actors with decision-making power. But substantially, one of the 4 axes of the government plan was devoted to the feminist transformation. And that gave us a clear mandate to politicize all inequalities, to adopt structural approaches, but also to send a signal to the other ministries, like we are leading this field, which is not a ghetto field, because in the feminist transformation axis, there were policies related to sexual and reproductive rights, to security policy, to universities policy, action plans, anti-harassment protocols, and the economy, care services, anti-harassment policies in the workplace as well. So by having this axis, the signal was we are leading a bunch of policies, and this is going to be a different type of mainstreaming. But in order to be able to do that, and I think also now that I've had the opportunity these past 2 months to read about the literature, again, it is not about heroic actors. No, we became powerful actors because we were empowered. We had political leverage because this woman, the Secretary General of the party supporting the government, was a true advocate. And we could resource to her anytime there was something stalled in government. And she kept repeating this message: this Ministry of Equality and Feminism is here to stay. It was like, full stop, next, yeah? So she would also help us. When the structure of the ministry was negotiated, we got a number of directive units that's equivalent to more long-standing ministries like culture or education, not in terms of the number of staff. This is something you grow with the subsequent budgets, right? But in terms of a structure, we thought, yeah, we need to have a full troop of public officers that are going to go negotiate with the other departments on the introduction, on the mainstreaming of all our equalities policy. And also in terms of budget, there was a significant increase by creating the ministry and having more negotiating capacity. But also the Prime Minister was also doing his job in this regard. He had been socialized in the party youth, where feminism was one of the core values. Relatively young, he was 38 or 39 when he became president, and he took any opportunity he had, and this was very early on in the parliamentary session in which the cabinet was presented to Parliament. So he would emphasize that equality policies would be a core policy for the whole government, and that, as highlighted by other scholars, it was very symbolically. It was very important because there's an informal norm of deference to the Prime Minister. If a Prime Minister marks that he or she is very interested in one policy, the other portfolios will tend to, right, would like to please, because literally they want to continue. They want to endure for the full term, or they want to align with what's the full governmental program, right? But this helped us a lot. So after the cabinet reshuffle, when we became a single-party government, the first day I met this person, super nice, wonderful Minister of Health. He approached me, and we had this conversation. What can the Ministry of Health do for the Ministry of Equality and Feminisms? And there was this long-standing vindication by the women's movement that surgical abortion, not just the medical abortion, had to be guaranteed in the Pyrenees, because there's a lot of demographic dispersion. It's very difficult for women to get the service if it's not provided in several hospitals. And she said, yeah, of course we have to, but what about obstetric violence? Which was wow, this is serious. I wasn't planning to bring a full list today, but obstetric violence, and I wouldn't have time to cover it deeply here. It's a very contested issue within the medical profession. So having the health minister saying, but yeah, it is a problem, we have to tackle it, was very powerful. But the four main, what I've been reflecting on, what mostly changes in terms of governance beyond policymaking. It produces certain policies, but in terms of governance and what is being lost when there's no feminist insiders in the cabinet is these four things. in terms of how the rules of the game and the logics of appropriateness can be disrupted or redefined. And the one is gender mainstreaming itself. So yes, Catalonia, as almost all countries now in the world, have gender impact assessments mechanisms, right, that need to accompany the bills or programs that the government is putting forward. But in practice, how they were done, these reports, was basically one staff, one person in the Women's Policy Agency drafting the report. It's mandatory to request this report. The recommendations are non-binding, so you can imagine the success of the recommendation. But most crucially, if the bill has already been all drafted and then the recommendations come in, at least, I mean, the result is at most minor amendments. If the bill is already gender blind, or if there's institutional racism embedded in it, what can you do when the bill is fully produced? Almost nothing. But no one was there to stand for those amendments either. And that was the traditional logic. But I was present at the executive table. The Secretary General of the ministry, which is number 2, was present at the technical committee, the technical council that meets the week before and has to approve all the agreements that will be voted formally at the executive council. So we could exert not just veto power, but equality mainstreaming immediately. So we were embodying mainstreaming, and we were embodying also feminist intersectional mainstreaming, not just classic gender mainstreaming. So because we didn't have time to make legal reform, it takes ages. We couldn't afford it. We were already drafting 2 different bills, but also we needed change to occur while we were leaving that situation, not putting enough in 2 years' time. But also we needed these reports to be more comprehensive of our equalities framework, not just about gender. We converted the norms and we introduced new informal norms. So this is something that the feminist institutionalism has always discussed, but not that clearly unfolded, which is, how can we also play with the informal rules to our advantage when we do not have the sufficient capacity, or there's no time, we need other resources. Also, our embodied mainstreaming disrupted these entrenched ideas of compartmentalization of policies within the cabinet. And at the beginning, the other ministries were fine with, let's discuss this policy and this amendment you would like to have. But they were surprised that when they opened the door, we were not happy with sitting in the living room, but we wanted to see the kitchen, right, and cook the policy with them. So they had to learn how to co-design policies with us as well. But as said, the capacity to exert veto power, and us using it a couple of times early on, send a very strong signal that these were not the gender people that will adapt to the policies, whatever document we present. No, we must co-produce with the Equality and Feminisms Department, because otherwise it will stall. And we had the Prime Minister and the Secretary General behind us, the Party Secretary General. So as I said, these measures we don't have to use constantly, but we took the decision to use them early on to actually hint at the direction. Cabinet level status also allowed us to intervene directly in crisis policy making. You remember there was a summer, I think it was 2022, in which there was this spiking incidents in different countries. There was no drugs, so at the end it was not a public health issue, but the terror that was imposed on women being spiked was still significant. So, and who must act? So we had the health department not knowing what to do, the Home Office, so we took the lead. And that was a significant change. So a direct intervention in the governance of security and health by the new Equality and Feminism's ministry was a bit blind-blowing by many observers, like what they are doing. But yeah, they are guiding how to proceed. Also, we use this power to intervene in situations of institutional violence, either gender-based institutional violence, so lack of adequate attention, or also institutional racism or institutional LGTB phobia, so that we could design the reparation and the non-repetition measures with the others department, right? And finally, one thing that changed, and it has to do with policy, but it has also to do with governance, is that one of the classic state feminism, gender mainstreaming instruments is this single overarching gender action plan for a multi-year period, normally 4 years, and that guides the government during this time in all policy domains. This is not governable. It cannot be assessed. It cannot be accompanied. It tends to have like 300, 400. That was the previous experience in Catalonia as well. 400 actions in a single plan. Okay, who's leading that? And actions very different, like this training to the firefighters corps, and reforms in the courts building so that gender-based violence victims feel more secure. How can you manage this very big investment policy and this, €2,000 training session, 3 hours? It doesn't make sense, right? So instead of relying on these self-contained multi-annual gender action plans, very rigid, we designed priority areas, also cross-cutting mandates though. So we pulled together all the ministries in these programs, in these action plans, but with more specific mandates. And this gave us also agenda-setting capacity in terms of sexual and reproductive rights, including the free universal distribution of menstrual products, an anti-racism plan, or an action plan against racism. Okay, we did a few things. But there was a government turnover. There's a new government in place. Structural change policies, gone. The anti-racism plan has stalled. Preventative gender-based violence or LGTB phobia policies, gone. It's all about the women's shelters, but not about the prevention dimension. The distribution of reusable menstrual products has stalled, and the focus has shifted to poor women, so losing the climate justice dimension as well as the gender justice dimension with knowledge on our own body. The department is intentionally de-radicalized, and it's presented basically as a service office, okay? So what's very powerful in embodied change is simultaneously one of its main disadvantages. So how can we overcome this depoliticization, agenda displacement, institutional downgrading, hollowing out of the policies? And while there's several projects that in the context of the anti-gender movements, backlash, and far-right policies financed by the EU, reflecting on what civil society doing to help policies or the impact of this backlash be contained, or what can civil society do. We also need to reflect on what can institutions do to make the policies more resilient. And that led me to connect with the literature that some of them, it's already 20 years old. So Benschop and Verloo's reflection on the genderness of organization, of how, Sisyphus, the Sisyphus myth, it's this eternal punishment of rolling a big stone uphill, only to start over again next morning, and Benschop and Verloo say, well, but in feminist policies, we work together to start from a bit higher the next time and with more support, right? And this is similar to what Fiona Mackay was saying about the memory keepers. So they can be state actors or non-state actors, civil servants, equality units, trained officials, but also feminist civil society organizations, experts, external networks that can carry the knowledge, the practices, the intent of the reforms, so that they can, the next wave of reform can start from a stronger position. And this is what Cianetti is more recently saying with, yeah, let's not forget that inclusive reforms, and this includes feminist reforms, tend to follow a cyclical logic. They need several attempts in order to be able to sediment. So from my experience, I've been thinking about this potential for sedimentation through 3 different design moves. One of them is material embedding. So how can the policy documents, they can be, it can be a law, but practical documents, like protocols, frameworks, white papers, toolkits. So how can they be carriers, material carriers that can stabilize the new rules, because they are providing guidelines, the standards. They can fix the meaning. They have epistemic power, and they are useful to the professionals. So the political leadership might be gone, might be absent, might be even reluctant, but the professionals still need to do their job. So, for example, in the sphere of gender-based violence, right? We drafted this framework protocol. The law had been updated 1 year before we came into government, but we had to provide clear instructions on, okay, what does due diligence mean? How do we prevent institutional violence? When does institutional violence occur in terms of lack of coordination, non-adequate services, non-specialized responses, etc.? So this whole bunch of documents, they are still widely used. The coordinating bodies might not meet, but the professionals, these are the documents that are using. So the policy still survives in terms of how actors relate to each other, how incidents are reported, how the services are being planned in practice. And even this type of framework protocols, more specialized and non-binding for areas that the government has not a direct grip, like universities. Can we impose a protocol to university? No. No, it's the bodies of the university that have to approve an anti-harassment protocol. Okay, but what about these standards? So this is also empowering the people within the equality units and other actors to say, oh, but these are what all universities should do. So this also gives protection to other actors, to the variety of actors, and a common framework. And some of these frameworks have been adopted by the theater and the visual arts. So it's working to epistemologically share how due diligence should be applied everywhere, not just in public services. Same with, okay, that I said that action plan against racism is gone, but all these guides and toolkits are still being used when the local level, when city councils organize training to the reception services for migrants, but also social services. So this can still carry the policy as well as all the guides to introduce the LGBT perspective in the provision of services or the way that public facilities like community centers or sports facilities work. Another design move is institutional anchoring. And we met one day with the former Minister of Equality, federal level in Belgium, Sara Ahmed, and she was putting a lot of emphasis on, for example, how the Stop Femicide law introduced definitions that are now more difficult to be contested. So the government might put more or less effort, but all the actors within the system can organize the information and respond accordingly. this is where the opposition parties and civil society can also come in and vindicate this institutional anchoring, or can anchor anew the policies. So policies that might have disappeared. For example, as I said, it's less intersectional, so we tended to use oftentimes the concept of patriarchal violence, because come on, if you do preventative policies, won't you, the same type of prevention will be useful for LGBT phobia and gender-based violence. At least there's a big chunk of common activities. This was gone, but in the LGBT law that was passed a few months ago, we introduced that there, as well as actions to protect human rights defenders were gone. They have been introduced back here. So at least there's some continuity, and whenever there are actors that want to take it over, they have it more easily. Another institutional anchoring move is the structures. For example, this is one big commission with all relevant actors, governmental actors, but also non-governmental actors, not just civil society organizations, but also professional associations of lawyers, social educators, social workers, midwives, right? Everyone that can have a role in the implementation of policies or the prevention policies for gender-based violence. They sit there, they can integrate any of the working groups to design training, to design evaluation tools, or also in the committees. And the committees have to do specific forms of violence, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, right? So the government might not, the ministry might not be convoking when it should, the meetings. Any of those people sitting there can ask the government to convoke the meeting, and can also hold the government accountable for why one meeting, when one of the committees is not working, or why one of the documents was meant to be, in terms of tools, was meant to be adopted. It hasn't yet been the case. But the structures can also be decentralized, so it can carry the policy, or it can anchor the policy at the lower level, so to say. In terms of obstetric violence, for example, again, the Equality and Feminism Department, now without the plural S, no surprise, does not recognize as its own the sexual and reproductive rights policies. But because one of the actions in the plan was the creation of obstetric violence committees in public hospitals, it is now in the hands of the professionals. So they own the policy, and it's institutionally anchored. So while we might have intervened more directly in cases of institutional violence, because obstetric violence at the end is institutional violence, because it happens in a public facility, but by public workers, right? Even if it's not intentional, it is not about the intention, it's about the result, right? It can be carried out in the hospitals by professionals. And the last design move referring to institutional anchoring would be how budget lines are, we thought, could help institutionalize more the policy, and was in relation to the funding of the government of Catalonia to local governments. We decided that we wouldn't fund issues, let's say, openly. Do whatever you want with LGTB policies, we pay X. No, we are going to pay for the service, and we're going to pay for the personnel of the service. So this was also an anti-fascist move. We don't know next local elections in how many city councils the extreme right is going to have the mayorship. The policies, the campaigns might be very easily gone. The service is not so much when you have civil servants providing the service, right? You can, it's quite difficult to lay off a public servant. I know about Belgium, but it's very difficult generally. So the service might still stand, and it's not easy as well to relocate that person to do another thing, because the position he or she got has to do with specific. It can be done eventually, but it's about making it hard to dismantle, making it easier to endure rounds of either backlash or erosion. And last one would be, the last design move would be diffusion and appropriation, and it has to do with these memory keepers. The amount of alliances and co-creation spaces that can be set up. This is feminist policymaking, especially transformative state feminism would have it as a requisite. It requires a lot of effective labor, and I think we have to theorize a bit about that. It's not for free, it's very costly. Even when there's feminist activists in both sides of the institution, it's quite costly. But it has to be done. This is, for example, the free distribution of menstrual products, our main allies here, besides civil society organizations who had pushed for ages to have menstrual equity and climateric equity on the political agenda, there was pharmacies. And even if the government hasn't carried out an institutional campaign on a policy that's still live, so you can go, well, you know, you can't because you don't live in Catalonia, but every woman aged 10 to 60 and transgender people as well who menstruate can go to a pharmacy and collect the free products. So we ran the institutional campaign in March 2024. That was the last one. But the policy survives. And the pharmacists are doing these amazing TikTok and Instagram stories. They are the campaigners because they believe in the policy. And they've had the recognition as public health agents. So they also want to, you know, they feel ownership for the policy. When sexual education stalled, we had made it curricular through decrees. We were working with civil society organizations, but also with family associations, feminist teachers associations. The new government decided that it would launch a public consultation, which doesn't make sense because the policy is already a legal mandate. It's already curricular, and in this context of anti-gender politics, a public consultation on sexual education, you can imagine the type of comments, the type of input that this online consultation received. So the associations that had been co-creators of the policy launched a manifesto and made quite noise that this shouldn't be how it was dealt with. I'm about to finalize. Another way to distribute ownership is training, and you have here, for example, it's training on obstetric violence. They use theater to help medical doctors understand how they might be practicing obstetrics in a way that harm women, even if they do not associate these practices with violence. And finally, the way that framing is used also might help build this ownership of rights. We did not distribute products. We introduced the right to menstrual equity. We did not pass an action plan against racism. It is the right to a life free of racism and the right to a country free of racism. So, for example, when a couple of months ago, the Office of Equal Treatment and Non-Discrimination issued the first sanction to a real estate agency for housing discrimination on the grounds of race. The government was showing off, oh, look at the anti-racist policy we had. And there were several associations saying, well, look, yeah, congratulations. The Office for Equal Treatment and Non-Discrimination is doing its job, but the government has stalled a plan that was passed with 70 actions. And where is the anti-racism bill that was already drafted? So I think the way the policies are framed, besides the big alliance that was built around the bill and the plan, might help at least the policy to be on the public agenda to bring the government to account. So to conclude, I think we need to understand these feminist cabinet portfolios as democratic innovations because they are so exceptional, but we still need to know more about them, and it would be interesting to have this comparative work as well with the other countries in which it has existed. Also, which are the conditions for a feminist redesign that can endure more, and what are the conditions as well for the feminist watchdog roles? How can civil society be a watchdog if it's too much dependent on public funding, for example? There are classic questions that will come again to the fore with these questions, and then the very same role for the feminist designers, and that's a conversation we also had with Sarah Schlitz. Civil society organizations still know very little about how government works. We need to socialize more how government and public institutions work so that advocacy can be more efficient and can be more powerful. And we might be in a context of backlash or erosion, but we can still be part of this collective memory. And also, even if it's difficult sometimes, we need to bring optimism in feminist futures, because if we did it once, we, as in whoever stands for a progressive project, can do it again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tània. Fantastic lecture. We open the floor for questions. We will take through 3 questions at a time. So who wants to go first, second, and third? Everybody's still thinking.
Thanks a lot, Tània, for the very interesting and stimulating presentation. The question I have is that there was something specific with that government that was not only the feminist agenda, it's also that it's a government that was pushing for an independentist agenda, or at least that had the idea that that was part of creating or constructing a new country. And so, to a certain extent, it's also present in some of the slogans that are there, that we're making up a country that is free of racism, that is free of... And so what is exactly the part of that? Was that playing a role? The idea that there was a rupture, there was a breaking point that was not only in terms of the feminist agenda, but more broadly that it's not any government. That's a specific moment in time. So has that played a role? Is that completely absent? And the reason I'm asking that is, to what extent then should that be taken into account when thinking of finding inspiration of that case for other cases where that issue is not at all present? There is no idea at all of constructing a new country.
Thank you, Tània, for the great lecture. I managed to not ask the first question this time around. Big achievement. Yes, so I would like to invite you to reflect a bit more on what the priorities are, you think, in our backlash times. So because you mentioned, you ended with these really hopeful words, and thank you for the hope at the end of the lecture. Like, okay, it has been done in the past, we can do it again. But of course, times change, and there will be anyway a backlash time in between the T1 and the T2. So there will things will have changed, and I really wonder on what our priorities should be in terms of, democratic, feminist and democratic futures. Do you think it's useful to protect the policies of the 20th century, even they are also implemented now, and there I think about gender quota, gender mainstreaming, women's policy agencies, of the gender equality infrastructure. Do you think that should be our focus, or something else? And this is a question I have as an academic, but also as an academic activist. I really wonder what our priorities should look like, what to focus on.
I'm going to ask a third question if there are no other questions. No. I was also...
Okay, you go ahead.
Right. Hannah, did you have? Okay. My question actually goes also back to, I think, Alison's work on velvet triangles. And I was also wondering, in your let's say, framework, or the last slides with the points to pay attention to, where do you think, is there a role to play by academic scholars, and what exactly is that role? For instance, if you say the memory keeping, do you think we could play a role there, or where do you see specifically the role of academics in this?
Okay, I think I'm going to start with Karen's question. I think today's priority is to fight fascism, because it's preventing any progressive political project to stand, to move forward. It's eating the common sense of the general public. So I think this is the most intersectional fight nowadays, because it's not just the direct, more extreme backlash that some governments, Trump, Milei, Cast, Orban, might apply, but it's also how it's disciplining the left, many left spaces that now are afraid of not antagonize the right, or they don't want the focus of anti-woke media or whatever. And this cowardice is putting democracy in danger. So the first responsible ones are the extreme right and those who fund them, yeah? But the cowardice of other traditional progressive actors is also helping this common sense to, and I've said it in public before, so this conversation of the Spanish Prime Minister in a primetime radio program when asked about the Equality Minister Irene Montero and the sexual violence law, which had been extremely weaponized and trashed by the right-wing media and Vox, and he didn't defend her. And it was a policy that, look, now the European Parliament is saying this consent, this positive consent approach that's embedded in the Istanbul Convention, which is the framework for fighting gender-based violence across Europe. This is going to be part of the reform of the directive on gender-based violence. So this cowardice is helping the extreme right just gain more terrain and to constrain options. So I don't know if I answered to your question, but yeah, you're right. I mean, parity, gender quotas right now seem quite small compared to the challenging threat that's ahead of us, and one Brazilian journalist in an event held to counteract the organization of an anti-abortion conference in the Spanish Senate organized by Atlas Network, yeah? Because the Popular Party decided that, yeah, no problem, let's have Atlas Network organize an anti-abortion conference here. So the civil society and some MPs organized with civil society a counter event. And one Brazilian journalist said, if only 11 parties gave the same importance to gender issues than the right has traditionally done, and now the extreme right, we would be in a different place. So, yeah, anti-fascist politics and trying to convince the left, that intersectional alliances are the only way forward, but not to tone down policies. In terms of the academic role, I've been a bit critical, maybe because I didn't feel that academia was doing enough when we were under attack, but more generally when equality policies are under attack. So yes, there's an academic prestige and recognition vis-a-vis the public on academic arguments. So if the extreme right is just issuing false news, or if it's manipulating information, maybe. The academic positions, op-eds, public interventions in radio, TV can help counteract this. But at the same time, is it also true that nowadays, those academics doing that are not well protected either? No? So both things need to be true. Universities are very poorly doing very poorly in terms of preparing for what's already happened in other countries. So they should be doing more so that people feel more engaged. But yeah, especially those scholar activists in different policy fields or different topics, different political issues, could do a bit more, I think. Even organized to have universities be aware of what's coming on. And in regards to the interplay of discourses and political programs, okay, that was 2021. The referendum was in 2017. Everyone knows how it went, right? So Catalonia did not become independent. There was a huge political repression with even the former president exiled, but also the Secretary General of Esquerra Republicana, also exiled in Switzerland, accused of rebellion and, facing over 15 years in prison for, having called a referendum that could not be enforced if there was no negotiation with the Spanish government. But this is how the Spain judicial system and the political system decided to respond. So it was not the moment to, it was not the 2015 elections where there was this more contentious politics about, it was a more broad and conversation on the pros and cons of independence. But it is true that the pro-independence government will always try to set the example. Like if we were an independent country, that would be, or to expose the limits of, for example, in terms of abortion. So this is a central level legislation. It's the Congress of Deputies, because it affects fundamental rights, so it can only be, according to the competence distribution, can only be regulated by the Madrid, so to say, parliament. But the provision of the service falls under the so-called autonomous communities, the regional level, because the health system is decentralized. So when there's now this discussion, and that was already going on a few years ago, like the right to abortion should be constitutionalized. It's like, okay, Spain, but there are 10 regions in which there are no abortions whatsoever, because the regional government is not putting the resources, or because there's this institutional conscientious objection, which is not legal, but in practice, de facto, it happens. So the hospital's patrons from the church or other conservative groups imposing this on the health professionals, right? So Catalonia now holds about 40% of centers where abortions are practiced in Spain are found in Catalonia. So yeah, we could play with that, I acknowledge it. Play in the sense that, well, this is real data, right? We are trying to guarantee the right, but at the same time, we can claim, yeah, we were independent. This is an agenda. This is a progressive agenda. I can also admit that in a context in which the unionist forces, so to say, actors, were trying to depict the Catalonian independence movement as a far-right movement, probably because there's Liga Nord, and there is also Belgium extreme right parties pro-independent. No, I mean the situation. It's very easy to collapse them all in a single actor. Like all independence forces are conservative, are selfish, are the richest region. So no, and we could go and say, look, but we are distributing free universal menstrual products, and this is for climate change and gender justice and obstetric violence. I mean, we had a real transformative feminist agenda. But there was also another layer here, and I would like to reflect it on the book as well, because it has significant implications, and it goes beyond independence, right? But in vis-a-vis this international multi-layered system, when we met with UN Women or UNFPA, so the Agency for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, or other UN agencies, we could have this conversation like, why is the regional level excluded from everywhere? So there's no way that these instances, these agencies can just ignore the layer of government. There's a significant amount of countries in the world that either federations or decentralized systems with significant competencies that are actually the ones providing for the basic services, health, education, social services. So if they are not included, the policies will stall. These declarations are very thin and void. So it served multiple purposes, yeah. So I think that it can actually be exported beyond situations in which there's this independence debate. And especially now, I think if we manage to have more progressive forces not ceding on these topics and injecting optimism through the type of countries that can be built that are not based in exclusion, but rather on better futures for everyone. I mean, we should be, and Karen's working, and probably other people in the room, like in the role of emotions, how this can be transformed into something positive. This was an idea that we also had. This is also about this. The spot. No, don't worry. And we had okay, our institutional declaration beyond the spot was also very strong, but it was pedagogical. Like we are not born feminists. To adapt Simone de Beauvoir's iconic quote, we might say we become feminist. And we were using some of the examples here, and this. Federating in between, you know, you have to be like a geek in feminist politics to identify, so, because we made it very plain language for everyone, but it's in here. But we ended with, it doesn't matter when you join this feminist common sense. With feminism, it's all about starting, right? So it's about engaging more people with this fight for equal rights and freedom.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Tània. I was wondering, when you were talking about the leadership of the Prime Minister and the agency, so if I summarize, without his power or influence, the other ministries wouldn't accept that you go up to the kitchen of the policy making, right? What about the European level? Because you were talking about the fact that you've met the minister, she was Secretary of State at the time in Belgium. So what about the European level? Do you think the European level can also help to build resilient feminist policies? So is this also a level where leadership could help foster long-term policies, even when at one level of government the feminists are not there anymore? So can it keep up at the European level and then come back from there? So what was your experience with that? That's the question.
Thank you. We can still take 2 more questions.
I have one small follow-up question and then a new one. My follow-up question is about this idea that we have been discussing already a couple of times, so this anti-fascist that is the next big project that we should, well, it's not a new one at all, but that's the big one we should approach. You now mentioned, yes, and this is about convincing progressive left political parties that they have to really stand up, stand their grounds, and also a strategy towards those citizens that think they can be Switzerland and that they don't have to do anything and that they can be, you said they were cowards. And this is very much the big question, like how to draw them into this. So that, can you develop that a bit more? That would be interesting. But then my new question would be, okay, so now you are returning back to academia, and you have been part of the university structures that you sorry, I forgot the job you had, the equality officer. Equality officer. So are you planning to take up such a role again in your university, or would you create something else?
Yeah, thanks for your talk. I liked this idea about thinking through how to make a resilient policies in this way. But it strikes me that another thing to think about, and I'm sure you have, is how do you undermine those policies that are resilient from the fascist governments or the far-right governments or whatever it might be, because that is also part of what it takes to, I think, enact your vision. And so I was curious what your thoughts are on that, both either from your experience or your academic studies. Thanks.
Sorry, just to check that I understood.
Sure.
Your question is how to undermine the fascist policies or the policies of the right-wing governments?
Yeah, so I mean,
okay.
You got to make the policies that last in your vision, but also undermine those that are continuing to cause problems. Yeah.
Okay, the EU question. I've never been politically Eurosceptical, but when it comes to gender policy, I've never been that enthusiastic either, because it's always this very decaffeinated program, no? I mean, the EU accepted countries to the European Union that did not even accept divorce, that they had not yet regulated about divorce, let alone abortion. Divorce, it's a basic civil right. And those countries were, very respected members of the European Union. So yeah, it's true that, now there's a European directive on gender-based violence, but really a European directive passing, when was it, late 24 or early 25, sexual violence was not included there. It might be included now, but, it just reflects the conservative majority nowadays in Parliament and the Commission, right? But it's always been very, very minimal. The new LGBT action plan, it's quite mild, to say the least, as well. The anti-racist commissioner was demoted. So it's just a reflection of what's going on in other governments. So yeah, I wouldn't miss any opportunity to embed resilience anywhere. So directives can be one way, even if it's the minimal. At least this is the floor, and it prevents going below it. But it hasn't managed to make some countries ratify the Istanbul Convention. So the power in the EU with regards to gender policy, it has disappointed me several occasions. Don't know about you. I mean, it's better than not having it, of course. And yeah, it might still anchor, but not. I would rephrase my answer into don't miss any opportunity to build resilience into into institutions, also into legislation, even if it's EU legislation minimum level that guarantees at least some countries in terms of funding. There might be funding programs for NGOs for the provision of services or for doing research, while in the state members this might be threatened or abolished. So how to undermine the fascist policies of well, it depends on how long they are in government, and because then we might end up more about how civil society can build resilience and protect communities and individuals. And we might even, but this is an exercise that I would recommend doing everywhere. So it's learning from Eastern Europe and the United States. Would we be able, we in Belgium, in Spain, be able to provide for abortion services if they are eventually banned by the government? Because we've done it before. The women's movement has done it before, everywhere. So would we be able to restore those services quite quickly? Could we protect trans people? Could we protect migrants from being extremely marginalized if the local governments are not allowing for the registry, the municipal registry, right, the equivalent in different countries, so that this prevents them from accessing health, education. So how can we build these civil society infrastructures? That I would definitely learn from the countries in which this is already going on and these capacities have been built. Of course, not as if they were a public administration, but at least that they can help others not go that deep into marginalization and despair. But I would also encourage to think about what can all the other democratic institutions do to actively fight anti-gender groups and illiberal groups when they have the chance to do that. I think governments, for example, should be prepared to do strategic litigation against those groups. Because all the SLAPs, the strategic litigation against public participation that the extreme right is undertaking against journalists, activists, artists, right? They can really put people down in terms of resources. They can make an organization close down due to the the affairs of the judicial procedures, right? You cannot put the government to its knees, because it has a whole troop of lawyers that could sustain these processes against Christian lawyers. I'm naming real anti-gender organizations in Spain, just translating the names, right? Or make your call, Azteoir, right? I would do that. And for example, and this is a disagreement we had in government. Azteoir, one of these anti-gender platforms, filed a lawsuit against the government for its sexual education program. The lawsuit still, hanging there, but there was a judge that accepted the case, which had because the grounds were the lawsuit stated that the government is the same arguments everywhere, right? It's an international script. It's sexualizing children, that it's teaching 3-year-olds to masturbate, well, this type of stuff. So this is completely BS. But I would, that was my position, I would present a counter lawsuit for defamation. And let's see who wins. Probably it will take years, but let's have these people and these organizations spend real money, because we can afford it. But so that we are counterbalancing these organizations eventually take on the governments for their campaigns. But they are putting some civil society organizations, artists, journalists to their knees. So they need to face someone bigger. And that's basically governments, right? Or civil society organizations with big crowdfundings, but this is also starting to happen in several countries. But this is one of the actions. We need to have institutions not just seeing through, letting this hate speech, and no, let's act firmly against all these illiberal actors. We can only do it with the instruments we have as democratic states, but this can be enough in many occasions. And regarding the anti-fascists, I think it's a very wide. We need to have this conversation in many arenas, and it has to do with how we should require all institutions to be adopting proactive stances and policies. We can't just let go hatred speech in Parliament and that's it, because it's not only the political violence it causes individually, it's how it's giving these actors a free tribune to spread their hatred. We need a couple of beers maybe and a bottle of wine to map out the amount of spheres we can in policies we can intervene. But I'm already back to academia since 1st February, but what I fancy doing more, I think I need to step back from any position for a while, just to breathe, but also because I don't want it to seem like, oh, when I was the equality officer, we did that, and now, no, I think we need to have this distance. But also because, as pointed also in my last slide, I want to transfer the knowledge we learn in government, of how government works, how advocacy can be more effective, to civil society. I feel this is like the continuation of my political responsibility. And there might be an academic reflection on the form of a book or a paper, but I want to, I cannot just go back to activism as if nothing had happened either. I would love to do the billboards as well, but I think we need to open up some conversations with our peer activists on things that can be done differently, because we've seen the beast from the inside, and now we know better which are the things we can do together. Yeah.
Just going to quickly look at the time. I think it's time for a reception. Yes. Thank you, Tània, very much again. I thank you all as well. And tomorrow we have a seminar with Mark Brandt, who's also in the room today. So join us tomorrow at 12. Yes. See you then.
Thank you.